Hi, folks. I'm Sean Rabbit, Senior Consulting Engineer for Identity here at Jamf, and I am not a paid spokesperson for Apple, but boy, are these AirPod Maxes really nice. Today, I am joined by my friend up above me here, Mr. Mike Vandelinder, Product Manager
Hey,
for
Sean.
Jamf Connect. Thanks for joining in here today with us. So today's session is passwordless authentication and why you should use it. And we're going to discuss passwordless with macOS, its limitations and capabilities, some different passwordless solutions that already exist today for the Mac, and an overview of the new Jamf Unlock action, part of Jamf Connect. So let's get started today. So we had to jump to the grand fallacy first, because they say an expert is someone who gets over all the little nittering details and goes right to the big problem. Define passwordless when it comes to macOS. So at this point in Apple's history, as long as you see something like this when you first turn on your iPhone, chances are you're probably going to see something like this built into macOS. So macOS is built on the core fundamentals of Unix, and that means local user accounts with local password. When you combine file vault disk encryption, requiring a password to decrypt the drive, we're looking at macOS having passwords for probably quite a while. Now, the thing is that macOS has had passwordless authentication for years. Introduced in OS X 10.4, that tells you how old it is, Token D was able to use a SmartCard, or PIV, also known as a personal identity verification card, to authenticate users. OS X 10.12 introduced the Crypto Token Kit driver and functionality to manage those smart cards through an MDM solution. And in 2016, Apple introduced a MacBook Pro with a Touch ID system, a secondary passwordless authentication system that you could use after entering the password from a full power on or on decrypting file vault. When the Apple Watch was released, there was a new feature allowed a user to unlock their Mac by simply having their Apple Watch nearby. Features like Touch ID and Unlock with Apple Watch were enabled by a feature called a plugin authentication module, or PAM, which could delegate authentication, but only after at least one password was entered and would time out after a certain amount of time. So for now, there will be things to supplement a password, but there won't be a complete elimination of a password. Now, login credentials have long been a problem for security at organizations of all sizes and types. And we see the movement in the industry towards eliminating the password from accessing services. Most recently, with Microsoft announcing the ability to eliminate a password entirely for Azure. And authentication there, you just press the button. There is no password associated with your account at all. Now, this does introduce new problems, however, because legacy systems still need to be updated to use this functionality. And in some systems, they just absolutely need a password. Like, let's take, for example, here, I got a video coming up with a combination of passwordless and needing a password. So what we see here, hopefully, there we go. What we see here is a Jamf Connect login screen for a just-in-time user account creation on my Mac. And my user is set up with Microsoft's passwordless authentication, and I've selected a number on my Authenticator app, but macOS still needs a local password, and I want that password to stay in sync with Azure. So I'm prompted for my Azure password, and my account is created. Applications which still need a password, like macOS, will still need a password. So here I am opening the system preferences to see that I can still change my local password on my machine. And a local account's still a local account subject to macOS's rules. And even if my password is changed to something simple like 12345, Jamf Connect is still going to kick in and make it so I keep that password stay in sync with whatever the Azure password is. It's passwordless, but only up to a point.
So this is going to bring us into our latest release of Jamf Connect, and recently a new product that we introduced known as Jamf Unlock. So with Jamf Connect and with Jamf Unlock, we have been building on the core of our product so that we're able to provision new user accounts from the get-go using credentials from a cloud identity provider, and as Sean just showed there, the ability to keep passwords in sync. But we want to move towards these passwordless workflows and enable them on the Mac for our customers and their end users. And so Jamf Unlock has been introduced to remove the password from the Mac in most any place that we can today by instead integrating with the system's native support for smart cards. So Jamf Unlock is, again, this new application that we have introduced that works on iOS and iPadOS. And in times where you need to be able to authenticate to the system, Jamf Connect and Jamf Unlock work together to present themselves as a smart card to the system to authenticate the user into their user account. So Jamf Unlock is a new workflow that's included for customers that already use Jamf Connect today. Connect is the Mac application, Unlock is the iOS counterpart. Connect provides the ability and the workflow for a user to pair Unlock on their iOS device with their Mac. And from there, your Mac works more or less the same as if you had a smart card inserted in the system anytime you needed to authenticate. The added bonus is that with Jamf Unlock, there is no external physical devices necessary beyond the iOS device itself. So you're not having to provision any new hardware. You're just letting users use the devices that they already have with them. On top of that, because the device and the application are working like a smart card with the system, there is the option of also requiring a PIN. So if you wanted to have kind of that extra layer of security that users have to be able to type in a specific PIN, then Unlock has the ability to display that PIN for the users. And on the system, when they go to authenticate, just simply type in that same PIN during the authentication process. Now, because we're getting the Mac and iOS to work together, there's a couple of system requirements to allow for this to happen, and that's because we're using some of Apple's latest frameworks that are embedded in both of those operating systems. On the iOS side, iOS 14 or later is going to be required, and that also does work with iPad OS. Currently, we need to have a managed device in order for this whole process to be set up. The reason for that being that we want to have managed app config for the application on your device is to be able to tell the device which identity provider a user has to authenticate to go through the entire pairing process. The device itself doesn't have to be supervised. The MDM that's used to push the managed app configuration does not have to be the same as the management system that's being used for the Mac. We're just looking for a way to be able to deliver that configuration to the app as it's installed. Once the app is set up by the user, there's a number of privacy prompts that the user has to go through, again, to allow for the communications between the phone and the Mac. Bluetooth, location information for Bluetooth beaconing, network access, camera access for being able to scan the QR code for the pairing process. These are all prompts that the user would go through during the initial setup. And on the phone itself or iPad, we're relying on Face ID and Touch ID as our form of biometric authentication. So again, when the user is going through the authentication process, they're able to authenticate by simply presenting that biometric factor to the device. And there's privacy prompts involved in the setup there as well to allow for the use of those biometrics inside of our application. On the macOS side, again, this is a fairly recent requirement where you are able to support macOS 10.15.4 or later. The functionality itself was introduced in Jamf Connect 2.4, which was released earlier this summer. During the pairing process, the user does have to enter an administrator password to allow for the pairing of their identity certificate with the user account on the Mac, and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi have to be enabled on the Mac itself. I'll get to that in a second, kind of what the communication channel is between the phone and the Mac, and it is just using the wireless radios that are available to us on the devices. You don't have to be connected to a specific network. You don't have to be, specifically paired in Bluetooth settings or anything. We just need those radios available to our use.
I'm it. The goal of Jamf Unlock here really is just Hey, if we have these cameras set up like this, I gotta use it somehow or another. Why don't we just do fist bumps here every once in a while? There you go. The goal of Jamf Unlock is basically to make this better for your customers, right? Or your end users of your Macs. And we're really just eliminating password fatigue for those users that are always unlocking their authenticating on their Mac, especially at organizations that have complicated password requirements. I can't say the specific customer, but I was talking to somebody and they said they had counted 78 times they had to type in their password in one day. Now, if you could replace that with something that I have that's at least normally attached to my hip, my iPhone, uh, great. So let's actually take a look at it in action here. So we're going to walk through where the PIN number is required first, but we have these two devices paired, and we're going to go in and authenticate on something that needs a password, like the security and privacy pane in system preferences. Simply, I type in the password, the authentication request gets sent over to my device, I look at it with Face ID, and boom, authenticated. Same thing with we do something with sudo. So let's say we're going to do something like a sudo ls, not really something you normally need to do a regular, hey, why not? Type in the PIN number, unlock, look at it with my face, unlocked, bam, there's my ls command run as super user. Works the same way where you're unlocking a screensaver too. So if I lock my screen real quick, I go to unlock it, I'm asked for my PIN, slap in a new PIN number, hit enter, beacon, look at my face, I'm good to go. I'm now all set and back into my Mac. And now new is where we can go in and actually log out of the Mac itself, get to the real honest to goodness macOS login screen, not the file vault screen, important there. And let's log into this Mac, give it a second or two. There we go. And now I'm presented with my user. I have my PIN option appear on the screen, slap in the new PIN because it just rotated on me there. Authenticate with my face, and boom goes the dynamite. I am back into my Mac one more time. Now, just a note that as of the time of recording, this is displaying the Jamf Connect 2.5 Beta 3 software. So some visual elements are subject to change. And if you're a current Jamf Connect subscriber, be sure to log into your account on Jamf Nation and visit account.jamf.com to join in the beta program for many of our products, including Jamf Connect, to get access to new features first. Same exact situation here. Let's actually run it just without a PIN. So maybe an administrator has not required the use of a PIN on the device. Let's simply just hit the enter button when prompted for a PIN. And this is something you are going to have to educate your users about because we can't change this interface. It's native to macOS. So we'll enter, it's beaconing the device, simply open up the app, Face ID, simple authentication, we're authorized. Now, for IT admins, we got all the benefits. There's no extra hardware beyond what you're probably already issuing out to users on either an organizationally owned device or potentially they already own an iPhone of their own personal use. So nothing beyond that point. We have authenticated the user is authorized to use a method like Jamf Unlock when they first set up the device, because when you first set up and pair, your user still needs to authenticate to the identity provider to prove their identity. The iPhone, in this case, actually acts as a second factor of authentication. We have literally a physical token of having the physical device of the phone, and we're using the biometrics enabled by the phone, like Touch ID or Face ID, to replace the password. And network connectivity is not really required. The multicast protocol that Mike will talk about later doesn't require an active network connection to authenticate. So basically, you have offline MFA. And of course, the top three identity providers right now are supported Microsoft Azure, Okta, and OneLogin. Now, organizations do need to do some planning and have some infrastructure in place to use this passwordless authentication method. First, you do need an MDM, but given that you're here at JNUC, chances are pretty good you're into Apple device management. And we'll use the MDM to distribute the configuration to the Jamf Connect application on Macs and the Jamf Unlock apps as part of an app config. Second, your organization obviously needs some devices in place. And we're going to be assuming here that anyone that uses a Mac in the scenario will also have an iOS or iPadOS device of some form. Lastly, you have to have a cloud identity provider. Jamf Connect authenticates and keeps a local macOS password in sync with a cloud identity provider. And there are places like system preferences when you go to users and groups that's still going to require local authentication with a password no matter what. So we need to keep that password in sync. Mike, what makes this passwordless?
What does make this passwordless, Sean? And the simple answer is it's passwordless because we can use our phone to authenticate to the Mac in those times of need. And the reason for that is that the system has the support for authentication using smart cards. So we'll keep kind of coming back to this. There's either passwords for signing into user accounts and authenticating as an administrator on the Mac, and there's support for smart cards for doing the same thing. And what we're able to do through requiring the user to sign into their identity provider through our app Unlock on the phone is that we can generate the identity-based certificate for that user. So they launch the app, they sign into Okta or Azure, they go through multi-factor authentication. They do have to know their credentials to at least sign in that one time. But once they've authenticated, we now have the ID token for that individual. We're able to generate the certificate for the user within the secure enclave of that iOS device. That makes it non-exportable. We can trust that certificate and the private key for it are secure within the phone. We share the public key for that certificate with the Mac, and we're able to tie the credential, that certificate, to the user account on the Mac. From that point forward, anytime that we have Unlock enabled on the Mac and for Connect, when the user goes to authenticate, we have a crypto token kit driver, and I can talk about this again more in the future here, that allows for our application to behave as if it were a virtual smart card. So to be able to unlock and use the certificate that is stored in the phone, we have to unlock the secure enclave by using our biometrics. And now we have a whole chain for authenticating the user directly to the Mac. Again, simply by responding to a notification and a Face ID prompt on their managed iPhone.
So, needless to say, if you've got users that have been using a system that's been built around passwords for the last, bazillion years, it's going to be important to explain to your users what you're doing to change the system and how the Jamf Unlock pin is going to be working on macOS here. So, anytime you have an authentication request, like say installing software, it's going to trigger a request for a PIN. And if you're an administrator that's mandated a PIN, you got to teach your users to open up the Jamf Connect application to get the PIN. If you have not enabled the PIN, you got to teach your users just to hit the enter button and look at their iPhone. The phone will push a notification, or the user can simply open up the Jamf Unlock app to do a Face ID and authenticate. And as we saw in the video before, any place that requires an authentication is going to work the same way. So that could be a sudo or a su request. It could be installing software, or it could be unlocking the screensaver or waking up from the screensaver. Or now, like we saw with the new macOS login screen, the operation is all the same. Either get the PIN from Jamf Unlock or hit enter if no PIN's required. Now, one important exception to this is the File Vault unlock screen, because on macOS devices with an Intel processor, the File Vault unlock screen is actually done at like an EFI firmware level, way before the Mac operating system has even started. It may look like a macOS login screen, and it's pretty convincing, but that's because Apple is really great at user interfaces. In fact, they own the whole stack, so they can make it look any way that they wanted to. Remember, the default behavior of a Mac is to take and pass that authentication to macOS once it starts. Skip the login screen. Even though the macOS just booted and said, hey, I don't have anybody logged in. macOS looks at this token and says, hey, I know this dude. It's logged you in. So on machines with File Vault enabled, we're still going to need a password to decrypt the drive, much in the same way that you need a passcode to unlock your iPhone or iPad from a full power down. Mike?
Okay, so a bit of the tech overview of how Unlock is able to work on the Mac. And we leverage a few Apple technologies that make it so that are basically the reason why we're able to, one, do this, but two, why this is exclusive to Apple devices. Unlock is an app for iOS. It doesn't exist on other platforms, and this is a solution that we built tailored to the Mac. And those technologies are Crypto Token Kit, multi-peer connectivity, and core Bluetooth. Crypto Token Kit, which I had mentioned previously, is Apple's new system for public key infrastructure in working with smart cards with the Mac itself. So our application has a Crypto Token Kit driver that's running in the background that, again, is able to act as if a physical smart card is being plugged in by inserting and removing our virtual smart card when Unlock is available on the phone. This allows us to perform all the same encryption and decryption key exchange processes that you would be familiar with a smart card today. The second technology is multi-peer connectivity. And you may not know what this is. You're probably more familiar with some other Apple branded technologies like AirDrop that this is most akin to. What multi-peer connectivity can do is it allows for different Apple devices to communicate to each other over an ad hoc network. They'll use, again, whatever radios they have available to them. So it's probably going to be Wi-Fi because that's generally available in high bandwidth. The devices don't have to be on the same network. You could be sitting on an airplane where you don't have access to a specific Wi-Fi network, but the devices can find each other. So as long as Wi-Fi is enabled, the two devices can beacon to one another and communicate over an encrypted, secure channel. And it doesn't require having any prior knowledge, about how those devices can communicate, other than the radios need to be enabled. The other and third technology is core Bluetooth. And core Bluetooth kind of acts as a backup in the case that Wi-Fi isn't available between the devices. But generally speaking, we're using it for beaconing and notification purposes. So when I'm on my Mac and I'm trying to authenticate to the system, and that causes a notification to be sent to Unlock, that is happening over Bluetooth. It's local communications between the devices within the range of their radios. It's not using, the internet to do this. This is all local communications between the devices. So as I mentioned, because we're able to use multi-peer connectivity for the communication channel between the devices, we can ensure that the data itself is encrypted in transit, that there's a way to flag that type of traffic for multi-peer connectivity. So we can create ephemeral keys for each of our devices that are used for each new connection between the phone and the Mac. And on top of that secure encrypted channel, again, if you want to, as an admin, require just an extra level of scrutiny or security, then you would be able to enforce a PIN on the Mac. So when you go to authenticate and the Mac asks for a PIN, if a PIN is required, the Unlock app in iOS is able to generate and display the PIN that the user needs to follow through with the authentication prompts.
Beautiful. Now, rather than get into all of the extensive details of how to set up Jamf Connect and Jamf Unlock, be sure to check out Mike's session with a hands-on workshop as part of JNUC as well, where we'll go over all the bits and pieces. But here's a quick overview. First, you are going to need an MDM to push settings down for the Mac and the iOS device, because you're going to push down the config profile to the Mac, and you're push down an app config along with the installation of your app. So once configured, you'll use the MDM to deploy this box of lemon jello to your Mac and a app config with the iOS device. Now, if you've got somebody who's a BYOD, they're going to be prompted to install the app using their own personal Apple ID, but doesn't matter, the app config will still get pushed down if you do it through that or through Apple's well-named volume purchase of apps and books program instead. And we won't go into all the details of deploying Jamf Connect here, but we do have a session from last year on how to deploy Connect at scale. There's been some improvements since that process last year, so probably check out the admin guide as well for more details. But in this QR code right here, you can also see, sorry, that QR code right there. There you go. Mirroring, how does it work? You can get some more details on how you might want to actually set up Jamf Connect in your environment. If you've already got Jamf Connect configured, you simply need to add one more key in there. There's a dictionary for unlock that says just enable unlock. It is turned off by default, and you can optionally require a PIN or a set of true or false to say, yes, I do want that in my environment. Now, if you want the whole enchilada and you want unlocking from the macOS login screen, you can actually go in here and just steal this exact app setup, point it at com.jamf.connect.login, and it will enable the login for the login screen as well using the SmartCard device of the Jamf Unlock software. Now, again, this was recorded during Jamf Connect 2.5.0 Beta 3, so these instructions may be subject to change. Jamf setup can be distributed to devices both institutionally owned as well as your BYODs. So with Jamf Pro, that's easy. We just check the box that says make this app managed and manage it even if it's already unmanaged and installed. With other MDMs, your mileage may vary, so please check with your vendor to see if they support app config. App config for iOS is reasonably simple, and it's in the Jamf Connect user manual with a provider client ID application, and if we want to turn the PIN on or off in the app there. And in fact, you can actually make it even easier on yourself. New in Jamf Connect configuration, the companion app for administrators like us to configure Jamf Connect, we have an Unlock config exporter that gives you a starter app config to toss at your MDM. So you can drop that right in place in Jamf Pro with no problem. Now, your identity providers will vary slightly for setup. So for example, with Microsoft Azure, you can simply use the existing Jamf Connect app registration. You just had to add an additional redirect URI for the Jamf Unlock application. And most likely your client ID will not consist of a bunch of at the end of it there like this one. But for other applications like, say, OneLogin, you are going to have to create a separate app registration with a native type as opposed to a web application. But again, this is inside the setup instructions. And Okta, because you don't actually have to have any OIDC applications registered at all, you do need to make at least one to use in Okta, but you can also reuse one of the existing ones you might use, say, for Access Client ID. Mike?
On the phone side, it should be pretty quick because once the application is deployed to your iOS device, the user is just expected to be able to launch the application. And because of configurations that you've already deployed to your managed apps, they'll just be asked to sign into the identity provider that they already use every single day for their single sign-on purposes. So once they're signed into their account, the pairing process will kind of allow them to go through the privacy prompts that are needed to go through the rest of the process for pairing with your Mac. But ultimately, you'll be asked to scan a QR code inside of the app on the phone. Connect is able to display that inside of the menu bar application. There will be a request for the administrator password on the Mac side to approve the pairing. And at that point, they should be good to go. You'd be able to open up system preferences, click a padlock to unlock a certain preference pane, and see right then and there an example of being able to unlock to your Mac by using your phone.
Did you say see an example, Mike? Why, look, it's a video that shows just that. This one right here is actually using someone who's already logged in once to Azure. So as you can see, I just selected the user account, and now, of course, it just has you log into your tenant. Our test tenant actually federates itself to Azure ADFS. So Azure ADFS, brain not work, long day.
All the things together.
And so we just sign in. Exactly. Just smash them all in there. It's fine. Users will know what they're doing, right? Then you have to give permission again, Face ID. And then you give a billion other permissions. Some people ask, why do you need location services for this piece? Mike, could you clear that up there of why you need that?
only for Bluetooth beaconing, so that the devices themselves can know if they're near one another.
Don't tell my niece and nephew that I stole their rabbit and cactus for this part of the video here. But let's pick up our phone. We'll point at the QR code here. And my favorite part comes up here in just a second. Oh, not this part. Of course, you got to give notification access. We'll do that. Yay. Whoever added the confetti, I just 10 out of 10 would buy. I appreciate that there. And now these two are tied together. So at this point, any authentication request will be able to be done right from your iPhone. Sweet, simple, and easy. Let's see it in action. A lovely pin. Hit enter. Boom. That's all she wrote.
Yeah, so if you already have Connect, if you're a subscriber today, you are ready to go. You can get Jamf Unlock from the App Store. Feel free to add it into your Apple Business Manager, Apple School Manager, VPP process, and then set up the application for deployment to your end users. Plus, have Connect on your managed Macs. If you don't have access to Jamf Connect already, then set up some time to talk to Sean. You can go through more or less the same demo, or talk to anyone in our sales team, and we'll be able to ensure that you have access to an evaluation guide and a copy of the software for your own uses. So, on behalf of myself and Sean and Jamf and the Connect team, thank you for watching our session today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your JNUC 2021. Take care.